Good morning. Today we're going to be tying up a Puterbough Foam Caddis. This is going to be kind of in an elk hair caddis tradition, and I happen to be going up to our cabin in Idaho hopefully next week, and I really like to fish with elk hair caddis when they're coming off, or caddises when they're coming off. Usually a fairly small pattern for me up there. This is a size 16 TroutFly hook. More commonly I'm going to be tying this down to an 18, which can get a little bit challenging just because of the kind of materials that we're using here. But it's going to float because it's got deer hair on it and it's got foam on it. So I've got my thread started here. I'm just using an orange nano silk. It just is going to match my hackle a little bit, and you can change up the look of this fly just by changing the color of the hackle. You could go straight up grizzly hackle on it. You can go furnace to get a different look. I'm going to go with this more of a rusty color. And that will change really the entire look of the fly. We're going to be using some 2mm foam on the pattern, and you can see it's very deceptively for you on the screen. It'll probably look large, but this is just tiny. Tiny little piece. I've already prepared one where I've rounded off the back end of this like that, and I want this back end to hover over just over the back of the hook bend there. So I'm going to take my thread, I'm going to turn it counterclockwise. That'll help make sure that those thread wraps wrap back towards me. I'm going to pull that down, and then I'm going to start compressing, moving forward. And you do want to be a little bit careful here. I want to get this nice and compressed. But at the same time I want to make sure, especially right up here where the body is going to be, that I'm not pulling so tight that I cut right through that foam. This nano silk is awesome because you can pull it damn tight and hard without it breaking on you. But at the same time, because it has that strength, it will cut right through foam. So I've got that piece. I'm going to bring my thread right back to where that foam body is sitting, and again you can see it's just kind of hanging over beyond the end of the hook. I prefer to tie this with deer hair. Other people use elk hair, and I also prefer to use a bleached deer hair just because it's easier for me to see on the water. This one's not going to be too hard to see anyway because it's already got some foam on it, but we're going to cut out a nice little chunk. We'll comb it first, and then we'll stack it. So I always do like to kind of show this because this is one of the tips that made the biggest difference for me, especially when I'm tying with one of these hair wing flies, is if you look at this, and hopefully you can see it with the macro, you can see that there's a lot of fuzz here in this hair. It's called underfur, and I want to get that out of here. It'll stack better, it'll tie in a lot better, it'll really improve your flies a tremendous amount. So I've got a comb. This just happens to be a loon comb, and I'm just going to kind of run it, and I'm going to lose a few of those fibers as I do this, but I'm going to run that through a few times just like that. Then I'm going to pinch, and we're going to hold the other end and just make sure we get anything that's out here. And again, this is just going to help us stack. And if you're new to fly tying and you're wondering what the hell is he talking about when it comes to stacking, so I've got that nice and combed out. And what you'll see here on the ends is that we've got ends that are all different lengths. They're not lined up at all. And that's why we stack, because I want a nice lined up wing here. And today I'm just going to use this kind of a stacker. I've got a couple but I've been using this one a little bit more lately. In the past I would always, and I do turn to this. This is my tried and true. I think it's like 30 years old at this point. Just a brass hair stacker. And if you're stacking hair, usually your hair stacker is going to have this kind of opening here that's beveled, so that it makes it so it's easier for the tips of these hairs to go in. And that's how I want them to go in, is tips first. What I've cut, the end I cut, should be up at the top here, and then we'll stack. Okay, once I'm done stacking, I'm going to take my stacker up here. I'm going to take it kind of horizontal. This just hinge opens up, and hopefully you can see that the ends of the deer hair now are very nicely lined up. And when I'm doing a hair wing, I always do actually start with kind of a measurement. I want this wing to be about the length of that abdomen. And then I know I'm going to tie it in right about here. So I'm going to pinch this for measurement right about like this. You can see how long those butt ends are. There are different ways of tying. Some people will tie it in just like this and then trim out the butt ends, but instead with me, what I'm going to do is we're going to trim them first, and then we're going to tie them in. And I actually prefer that method. I've done them both over the years, and this method just is cleaner for me, and it's really not as difficult as you might think it is. So you can see now I've trimmed those butt ends off, and so now we only have that kind of showing. I'm going to go ahead and, by rotating my thread counterclockwise here, that thread, when I make a wrap, is going to jump backwards towards my finger rather than bowing out over the eye of the hook here. So I'm going to put those tips right about there. You'll see it's going to balloon out and make that nice little head shape. So again, for the hackle, I'm using this color that's just kind of a nice rusty color. I've already pulled a feather off and been using it to tie some other flies. I've sized it for a size 16. It's prepared. I've got the stem stripped. You'll want to make sure that you have at least 3 or 4 inches of stem when you're tying this. I hope you all know that I'm kidding. I have way too much stem sticking out here, but that's not going to be a problem because we're going to tie it. We're going to tie it down and we'll clip it off. I just happen to have that much stem. And what I'll do when I strip for tying is the side of the stem that's going to be touching up against the hook. I'll take a few of those fibers off as well, so you'll notice that there's just probably about 10 or 15 fibers, maybe 10, gone off of the top side of this while they remain on the bottom side. And then we're going to tie it in. I'm going to turn my thread counterclockwise again just to make sure that I get it wrapping backwards. And I'm going to get one wrap this way, and then I want to get that feather to stand straight up, just like that. And notice that everything should now be fairly perpendicular to the shank of the hook. With that, I'm going to take a couple of wraps on the back side here just to lock it in. And then we'll just go ahead and I'll start taking some thread wraps forward towards the eye of the hook, and you'll see that our mile-long stem is going to come along with us for the ride. At least 2 eye lengths behind the eye of the hook is where I'm going to cut that stem off. I don't want to have it right up at the eye of the hook when I cut it off. I want it much shorter than that. So we've gone ahead, we've clipped that off. We're sitting in pretty good position here. All I'm going to do is I'm going to try to get a more consistent slope on this, moving down towards the eye of the hook, just to help that hackle have a much smoother area to travel down. And then we're going to put a half hitch in here, or in this case I'll probably whip finish just because it's more accurate for me. So I'm just going to give it out a little bit of thread. And I'm not whip finishing like I'm finishing the fly. I'm just really trying to put a knot in it. But I don't want that knot to slide further up or back. So I'm just going to take a wrap or two here, just like that. Go ahead and release that from my whip finisher. Give myself a tiny little bit of extra thread, and then I'm going to pull my bobbin cradle over into position, and I'm going to hang my bobbin on my bobbin cradle, right? So now I've got my hands free to work with my hackle here. So now that we're attached with our hackle pliers, I'm going to take that one first turn all the way around, and then I'm going to do the best that I can to just make palmering touching turns of our hackle, moving up towards the eye of the hook here. And that's going to be good enough for me. Move my bobbin cradle out of the way. Get my thread back. I'm keeping that tension on this hackle because I don't want any of this to come unwound. And then I'm going to kind of take a wrap over the top of that stem to lock this in place. You'll see I'm kind of jiggling my thread. I do that sometimes just to help me keep from trapping too many of those fibers. By moving it back and forth, some of those fibers will just kind of move right back out of the way for you. So I've got that pretty locked down at this point. I feel very comfortable to remove that from my hackle pliers. And I'm going to put a half hitch in here, and then I may do a little bit of cleanup depending on how many fibers that we've ended up trapping. I like to use a half hitch tool like this in this particular situation. It's hollow on the front. It just allows me to stick this hollow end over the eye of the hook, especially when I've got a front hackle like this. I'm just going to wrap my thread around there, slide that over the eye of the hook, and then just let it slide right off, and we're secure now. I may put another one in just because I'm a belt and suspenders kind of guy. So with those two half hitches in, that hackle should not at this point come free. I'm going to come in and I want to clip that hackle off right against as close in as I can, right where it is to the hook, while not trying to not cut out any of the other fibers here. So rather than whip finishing, I'm just going to do what we just did to secure this down. I'm going to use the same tool. Do a few half hitches. My eyesight is not what it used to be, and I can see some fragments flying out there from this fibers from the thread there, but that's going to be good enough. I'm going to grab my little tool to cut my thread here as close as I can. Just like that. And there you have it. The Puterbough Foam Caddis. Get a hook, some foam material, put it in your vise, and have some fun.